Feel free to ask any questions in the comments or Q&A, and we'll also have a Q&A session at the end. But Ethan, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Diego. And make sure, Diego, can you see my screen well? And we don't have any pop-ups as we're in good shape there. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all for attending. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. As Diego said, my name's Ethan Bredemine with AgriLogic Consulting. We have Kim Harris, Tom Bland, and Brandon McDonald as well with us. And welcome again if you've attended our first part of the Winning at Risk Management, or welcome if you haven't attended any of our previous webinars before. I hope this is a great opportunity to learn about some different programs that are available. And with that, we're going to get started. I want to start real quick at the beginning of the session. I'm about to send a poll, launch a poll. And we have a real debatable topic that we've all been talking about prior to this webinar. What is the best vacation spot for you? Is it the beach or the mountains? We'll let you pick one of those two. Did you attend any of the following sessions? So our Crop Insurance 101 webinar we had back quite a few months ago now, it seems like. The Crop Insurance 101 webinar or our in-person sessions. We had the webinar in, I believe, January, and then Kim and myself and another one of our policy analysts went to Tennessee, North Carolina, and Texas and had Crop Insurance 101 trainings there. So if you attended any of the in-person or webinar or that part one or both, select that. And then the third one, which program are you the most interested in? Apiculture or PRF, and select which one of those that we're looking at. Diego mentioned it. Be sure to apply, or be sure to, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, we're going to try to get to those as soon and quick as possible. Kim and Tom are both really good at jumping in on the questions and making sure we get all your questions answered. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation for any outstanding questions. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds. Kim, what do you think? The beach or the mountains? What's yours favorite?
It's a tough one. I don't know. I'd like to do both. And can I say all of the above? All the above.
All the above.
Probably mountains.
That's 2 years ago. I was at the beach, and then I got to go out to Utah and do a livestock show last year, and got to go enjoy the mountains. So I'm right there with you as well. So we'll share those results. Looks like we're about 50-50, pretty close between the beach and the mountains. And then welcome. We have 78% have not attended any of our sessions. So welcome. Thank you. It's always good to get new blood coming in and see, and we hope that you enjoy this presentation. We see you again, welcome again for coming back. And then which program we're looking at, 2/3 apiculture and then 1/3 PRF. So great there. We're going to highlight both programs, and so get everybody involved as well. They're very similar programs. Of course, there's some differences as well, but we'll get to talk about those differences. So with that, we will get started. So who are we as AgriLogic Consulting? So we're an agricultural, economic, and insurance consulting firm. Our big primary objectives that we work on are research and development of crop insurance programs for the federal and private side. We've had combined experience over in 250 years. Like I said, we're mainly based in College Station, Texas, but Kim is in Illinois, and we have other employees in Florida and in Kansas as well, and across the country. And so great opportunity that we have to come to you today. Another thing that we work on is risk management education and getting to reach out to individuals such as yourselves and teach you about the different programs and different offerings that we see on the public and private side. Farmer Veteran Coalition, Diego will highlight this great organization that we've been partners with on this project, and has a lot of different great opportunities for veterans. And so Diego, like I said, I'll let him highlight those different opportunities that are available, but it's a great organization. It's been a privilege to work with Diego and Nick and their crew. And then also the USDA Risk Management Agency. This webinar and this project that we've been working on with the Winning at Risk Management series is funded by the USDA RMA. There's the verbiage there. Chola, Bill, and Brian have been great help as well on the RMA side, helping us put these presentations together. And again, thank you to RMA and Farmer Veteran Coalition for all the work that they do. So those who have not been able to attend the Crop Insurance 101, farming's a risky business. We can know, we were just talking about a while ago, my dad about a month ago had a pretty good wheat crop, had about 150 acres of wheat get held out. And so it's farming's a risky business, whether it's that or whether a really expensive tractor goes down. He had that happen about a week ago. And or if it's cows getting out, we had that happen about 2 weeks ago. So it always seems like there's something and risk is involved. And the three main ways that we look at it when you're looking at risk is between severity and frequency is what makes up risk. And then crop insurance is a great way that we can transfer a portion of that risk to a third party entity, such as your crop insurance company, and transfer that risk off where you're capped at how much losses you're going to have. I always talk about, you can reduce the severity and the frequency depending on what it is, like cows getting out, you can usually help that. However, it's real hard to tell that hailstorm, you don't need to come here, you need to stop. So that leaves us with that transferring that risk, which is the third component. Crop insurance is, there's federal programs and private programs as well. They're mainly both administered by private insurance companies. And then on the federal side, it's backed and premium subsidized by the federal government. So that's where we see on the federal side, a lot of benefits is having that backing and that subsidy that helps our farmers and ranchers. And then when we look at it, you can really break federal crop insurance into four main buckets. Our individual base, what happens on your operation, area base, what happens in your general area, and then kind of a quasi area and individual base. And then today, what we'll talk about more is a parametric index or rainfall index is what we're highlighting today. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to summarize, and since we have a lot of great individual or new people coming in, we're going to talk about the benefits that's specifically for veteran farmers and ranchers. We're going to discuss the various components and characteristics of the Apiculture and PRF programs. And then we're going to provide examples of how these different programs operate and function. So we'll get started with the different benefits for veteran farmers and ranchers. And when I want to preface real quick that sometimes I use crop insurance, that's just sometimes the language that I use. That's referring commodities as well. So livestock, bees, a lot of different other commodities is probably a better word to utilize. But sometimes if you do catch me saying crop insurance, I apologize. Crop and commodity go hand in hand. So veteran farmer and rancher, what are the qualifications to qualify, or what are the elements to qualify? Well, you need to be in active duty or who served in active duty in the military, whether that also includes the reserve components, and then were discharged under the conditions other than dishonorable. And then the three, it's a step-by-step process. So step one, have you operated a farm or ranch before? If you have operated a farm and ranch, we need to go down to that step two. If you haven't, you qualify. All right, step two, have I operated a farm and ranch for more than 5 years? If I have operated more than 5 years, we're going to drop down to that third step. If I haven't, I qualify. And then that third step is, have I obtained the veteran status during the most recent 5-year period, even if I've operated that farm and ranch for more than 5 years? So it's, like I said, a step-by-step process. If you have not operated a farm or ranch, you qualify. If you've operated a farm and ranch for less than 5 years, you qualify. And then if you've just become a veteran during the most recent 5 years, you qualify as well. So there's that step-by-step guidelines. If so your spouse does not, if she or he is not a veteran, you would still qualify. However, if you're starting a partner, if Kim and myself and Diego, we're all partners on a farm or ranch, and if one of us was a veteran, we would not qualify. We all three have to become or qualify under those qualifications in order to qualify. There's a lot of qualifying there. for a business, all parties must qualify under a veteran farmer and rancher. So what are the benefits? We get the administrative fee usually on our buyout policies. We're looking at $30 per crop per county. That is waived. And then on cat coverage, we're looking at, I think, $655 a crop per policy. Those fees are waived. And so that's always a good benefit. You get an additional 10% premium subsidy for your buyout policies. And like I said, our Crop Insurance 101 presentation, it's out, I believe, on the Farmer Veteran Coalition YouTube channel. We highlight and talk about premium subsidies there, but you get an additional 10% on that. You get to use if as long as there's permission from the party prior to you, you get to use that previous producer's production history and the acreage transferred to you. Again, like I said, if you were involved and if there's permission. And then that yield adjustment, we won't talk a lot about this today, but basically in other programs, we were going to talk about APH programs, this upcoming webinar in part 3 of our Winning at Risk Management. And so instead of a 60% yield adjustment, they bumped that up to 80% of your transitional yield. So beginning farmer and rancher, it's going to be the same exact benefits as we saw in the veteran farmer and rancher. You must have operated a farm and ranch for less than 5 crop years or less than 10 crop years when we're talking about whole farm revenue protection. And then crop years are excluded. So if I was active with my dad growing up, sophomore, junior, senior year, I'm in the farming operation. I go to Texas A&M University and then I come back. Those years between when I was under 18 and during college do not count towards my crop years. So I would still be able to qualify as a beginning farmer and rancher. And then again, you must be an individual. If you're a business, your partners or as many partners are involved, they all must qualify also as a beginning farmer and rancher. Limited resource farmer and rancher is a third possibility of benefits that are available. Basically, if your index value is, or if you have a direct or indirect gross farm income less than the current index value for each of the last 2 years, and then if your household falls below the national poverty level for a family of 4 or less than 50% of the country median household income of the previous 2 years, you would qualify under this. There's a lot of great benefits available through USDA. If you qualify under this limited resource farmer and rancher, best thing that I can say, if you're not for sure if you qualify or not, that's a great link. USDA produces a great resource determination tool to see if you qualify as a limited resource farmer and rancher. So great benefits that we have here if you qualify as that or beginning or a veteran farmer and rancher. I think there are great opportunities that are out there and a lot of great benefits also that are involved. So with that, before we get really rolling into apiculture and PRF, I wanted to release another poll. So do you qualify as a beginning farmer and rancher, a veteran farmer and rancher, limited resource, more than one? You do not qualify as any of those that were mentioned, or you still have no idea if you qualify or not. And I'll give you just a minute or two to answer that poll. Do we have any questions in the chat, Kim, Tom?
We do, and I'm just working on the response to the one about NAP.
Perfect.
And it might be easier just to say it instead of sitting here typing it out. So NAP is a program that's administered by the Farm Service Agency. It is not part of the multi-peril crop insurance program, so it will not be covered in this program. And in our presentations, we're basically focusing on federal crop insurance. Well, that was a whole lot easier than all that typing and all that correcting of my typing.
And I will add to that too. We will send out and Diego will probably highlight this at the end, but we're going to send out a post assessment. I know those are always hard, and everybody's asking for an assessment or a survey or something. I would encourage you to fill it out. It helps us gauge on what we need to tweak in upcoming presentations. And then also one thing that I will highlight, talking about the NAP program. If you want to learn more about that, put that in the comments. Say, hey, I'd like to learn more about NAP, or see a presentation about NAP, and they when we're looking at future presentations, and we hope that we can add some of these different things and highlight that and make sure we target what y'all guys would like to know more about. With that, we'll end and I'll share. As we can see, about a quarter of us to a fifth of us qualify as beginning or veteran farmer and rancher. Outstanding. And then we have 44% that qualify more than one of those above. So that's perfect. And we did have one still no idea if you qualify or not. Hey, there's a lot that involved. We'll talk about talking to your crop insurance agent and making sure you find a good crop insurance agent. And those are always great resources to if you have more questions on if you qualify or not, be sure to reach out to them or us as well.
And Ethan, another question just popped up about a minimum size limit to define a farm. There are certain commodities that require size limitations that you must have at least this many acres or whatever, but the policies that we're going to be talking about today don't have any acreage minimums.
Perfect. Outstanding. Well, we'll talk about apiculture and PRF. So, in kind of a irony here, the first two programs that pop up are whole farm programs, micro farm and whole farm revenue protection. I know a lot of us were talking about our bee guys and then our guys who are raising livestock and our guys who are out baling hay under the PRF side. These two programs also possibly could be potential for you as well. Part one of this Winning at Risk Management series that we see, it's also on the Farmer Veteran Coalition YouTube page. You can view that, and we go in a little more in depth on whole farm and micro farm. But these could be good possibilities, and we'll kind of give a quick 30,000 view approach over these two programs. But they could be possible potentials for you. And then we're going to look at today our Rainfall Index programs, Apiculture, PRF, and then annual forage. We won't talk a lot about annual forage today for the simple fact that it's available in a limited amount of states. We're looking at like Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico, Texas, the Dakotas and Nebraska that annual forage is available in. It's also mainly for our big, large row crop operators. And so, like I said, PRF and apiculture are the two that we're going to really highlight today. As you can look at the insurance experience from last year in the 2022 crop year, we can see that PRF is a large program. I believe it's one of the top 5 plans that we have in the federal crop insurance program. And so we can see there's a lot of interest in it. It's a great program, and apiculture as well. We can see that it's a really $367 million in liability, really popular program as well. And I think it's a good program for our apiculturalist. So real quick, talk about that 30,000 view approach on whole farm. So what is whole farm and micro farm? Well, it's a risk management safety net covering all commodities underneath one insurance policy. So if you have bees, you're also raising tomatoes. Maybe you're also raising peaches as well and baling hay. Whatever that case may be, it's all those different commodities under one policy. We're looking at it's a Schedule F tax forms or is your reporting requirements that it looks for. And then, like I said, if your revenue for that year falls below your approved revenue, a loss is incurred and indemnity is possible. So what are the difference between micro farm and whole farm? Micro farm is more of a streamlined approach of whole farm. When we look at the differences, so we know talking about peaches, and we gave the example about making jellies or pies or jams, something like that. Those what we call post-production costs. So I harvest a peach and then I process it in order to make a jam or a jelly. That's included in micro farm, but it is not in whole farm. However, on the flip side, I can have a peach buy up APH program under whole farm, but I cannot have it under micro farm. And so that's a kind of the give and take. And we talk about those pros and cons, like I said, again, in part 1 of the Winning at Risk Management series. We talk about commodity count, and I won't go into details there, but for whole farm, you need to have a commodity count of 3 in order to get the 80 and 85% coverage levels, but you automatically qualify for those coverage levels under micro farm. So like I said, big 30,000 foot approach. There's a lot of good information in that first series of Winning at Risk Management where we talk about this, but just wanted to give an oversight because, like I said again, I do think this is two possible potentials for you, whether you're a beekeeper or interested in our PRF program for haying or grazing. So rainfall index programs. The big highlight here is that we're looking at a gridded precipitation basis across the country, and it's during a given time. So there are 2-month intervals that we're looking at, and the gridded precipitation is based on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Climate Prediction Center. That's a lot to say, and so basically the biggest highlight here, we had a good bit of rain. Diego and I we were all talking about it just prior to this webinar. It rained 3 inches at my house last night. However, right down the road from us, it may have only rained 2.5 inches, or it may have rained 4 inches. So the biggest highlight here is it's not necessarily what happens on your operation. It's what happens in that grid based on those measurements that your farm may be within that grid. And so that's the biggest highlight that I want to make sure is that it may rain 4 inches on your farm, but the grid may have only incurred 3.5, or it may have incurred 5. So there is a little bit of a variation there. Again, intervals are in 2-month periods, and you must elect 2 of those intervals, and then have a percentage of value. So it all depends. Our minimum percent is 10%, and then our max is depending on what your special provisions say for that program in that county. I've seen anything 50% is probably, I would say, the most common, but we go 50, 60 up to maybe even 70% in different areas. So let's say, and you cannot overlap intervals. So we have a January, February interval, February, March interval, March, April interval. I cannot have the 2 intervals cannot overlap, because we can't have January, February, and February, March. I got to have January, February, and then March and April. And we'll show a little more example for that to make a little more sense. And then, like I said, your percentage interval. So I elect 50% January, February, and then 50% March and April. Again, that total value needs to make sure that's 100%. And then, like I said, apiculture and then PRF are the 2 that we'll highlight today. Annual forage is also a possibility, and it's a rainfall index as well. When we look at our top states in terms of liability for apiculture, we can see that a lot of these states here, California, Florida, the Dakotas, Texas, Minnesota, Georgia, Montana, Washington, and Oregon round out your top 10. As we can tell, that coincides with honey production in the United States. I think North Dakota, I believe, is the winner in honey production. But then, like I said, California, all the specialty crops that are out there. Florida, we have a lot of citrus crops. A lot of crops, and we know that bees are the #1 pollinator for these crops, and so we can see the evidence in the top states there. PRF, we're looking at a lot of our western states. Of course, Texas leads that, and then like I said, we go out west for the most part, with the exception of Florida. I know there's a lot of cattle and a lot of hay in Florida as well, and it's a large state as far as surface area, and so we can see those are your top 10 in PRF and apiculture. PRF and apiculture are available in 48 states. They are not available in Hawaii or Alaska at this time. And so, like I said, if you're in the continental US, you have both of these programs available to you. So let's learn about apiculture. Basically, it's a safety net covering the income sources such as honey, pollen collection, wax, and your breeding stock. It provides a flexibility, and we'll talk about like productivity factors, and then we've already talked about intervals. But there's a lot of flexibility. We know that in apiculture, and then also for our PRF guys, each operation is a little different, and so there's plenty of flexibility in order to account for those differences, and align this program to align with your production and the income that you're seeing on your production. Insured selects the number of colonies, your coverage level, your index intervals, and then the productivity factor. We'll talk about those here shortly. Honey production is basically your county base value is what they're primarily looking at. And then your yield is based on a 5-year state average based on USDA NASS data. And then price is based on the national average as well. so we can see our honey production on a national average. All right, PRF, we're looking at a safety net covering our perennial pastures, our rangeland, or our forage acres due to a lack of precipitation during those intervals that we select. Must be intended for either haying or grazing livestock. You must designate haying or grazing. And I would say primarily, if this is your hay field, that's what you'd probably need to insure it under. If this is what you're running livestock on and you're not going to use it as hay, probably grazing is what's for you. Insured selects number of acres, coverage level, your index intervals, and then that productivity factor. And then we're looking at hay production when we're talking about our county base value. And then it accounts for stocking rates and forage consumption on the grazing side. And then we're looking at on a yield side, when we're looking at this on a state average as well, price is based on our hay prices. And then depending if you're looking at irrigated hay or if we're looking at grazing, those grazing rates and irrigation rates will be applicable as well. All right, so let's look at an example timeline. This is what we're looking at for both programs, our sales closing, along with our production reporting, or acreage reporting and colony reporting, and then cancellation date, we're looking at December 1. Our contract change, so for the upcoming year, basically that contract change, any changes that occur with the policy have to be done by that 8/31 date. Premium billing is the earliest that an insurance company can bill you, and that will be 9/1. And then our end of insurance, of course, if we're looking at the 2024 year, would be 12/31 of 2024. So elect by 12/1, and then it's for that upcoming year, depending on the intervals you select. And then end of insurance, of course, is that end of interval, which would be 12/31. So let's take an example. We have a beekeeping operation. We send our bees out to pollinate our specialty crops between February and April. We're looking at a 10% minimum value and then a 50% max value. Of course, that 50% is accordance with the special provisions. So for this example, we're going to take a February and March interval, and then we're going to take an April and May interval, and we're going to have a 50% value for both of those intervals, which of course equals to 100%. We'll flip on the PRF side. So I'm running stocker calves, or maybe I got a cow-calf operation, and I'm pushing my stockers out there mainly between March and June. And then maybe I have another little group come in September and December, or maybe I got spring-born calves hitting the ground March and June, and those cows are really taking to nutrition because they are giving birth and have they need a lot of the forage, and so I need to make sure to ensure that. And I got some fall borns between September and December. According to special provisions, 50% is my max value allowed, and then a 10% minimum. So I'm going to break this up in 4 intervals. I'm going to have a March and April and a May and June. And since that's my primary time for my stocker calves or my cow-calf operation, I'm going to put 35% value allowed on both of those. And then flip in on the fall side, I'm going to have September and October, and then November and December, and I'm going to put 15% on both of those intervals. So that equals to 100%. So like I said, your minimum intervals allowed are 2, but you can definitely increase those intervals as long as it's appropriate for your operation, kind of such as this grazing operation. All right, so our colony reporting and our acreage reporting, what are we looking at? So number of colonies you have a share in, and then on the PRF side, we have irrigated practice, or if you have organic or non-organic practice, and then your intended use, so grazing, haying. Number of hives, or the number of acres per grid ID, is required. Of course, your insured share in the colonies or insured share in the acres. We need a lat and long points for either a point of reference in the PRF side, or where are those colonies located at? Where are those hives located at? And then on our apiculture side, we need a certification that basically your beekeeping qualifies as apiculture, and then those intervals are appropriate for your operation. And then, like I said, on the PRF side, land identifiers for acreage, that can be FSA numbers, common land unit, whatever the case may be. Those are the big highlights when we're looking at a colony report or an acreage report. All right, so coverage level, we've talked in our crop insurance 101 and then whole farm. Usually when we're looking at an individual based plan of coverage, we're looking at 50 to 85% coverage and 5% increments. However, being a parametric index base or rainfall index, we're looking at 5% increments ranging from 70 to 90%. Catastrophic coverage for PRF and apiculture is not available. And so when we start looking at our calculations, it's a little different than our typical individual base, but it's the same concepts. So we have a productivity factor and we multiply that with our elected coverage level. And in that county base value that we've been talking about per colony or county base value per acre, the product of those three components make up our dollar amount of protection per colony or per acre. And when we look at that on an interval basis, or what we say policy protection per unit, that's basically on a per interval, we're going to take that dollar amount of protection, we multiply it by our colonies or acres that we have, and then that percent of value. So that, in grazing, we were talking about 35 and 15%. In the apiculture example, we used a 50% interval. And then you multiply that also by your share, and then that's your total protection per interval or per unit. So what's this productivity factor that we've been talking about? Well, basically that is what's helping build this flexibility into these programs and allow what basically appropriately accounts for your production, whether you're raising bees or whether you're raising livestock or have a hay operation as well. You can elect, it's between 60 to 150%, and it's in 1% increments. And then you're only allowed one factor for each crop in county. So we use the example of Giles County, Tennessee. We have a PRF grazing we're electing, and it has a county base value of $56 an acre. So let's say I'm in Giles County and I have improved pastures and have a good opportunity where I'm pushing as many cows in there as I can. Maybe I'm running cows out there and they're a little smaller framed, and so I can increase on my stocking rate. So I got a little more dollars out there in value on a per acre basis. So I need to elect 100, or maybe I elect 120% productivity factor. And so when you look at it, you multiply that productivity factor by your county base value. Now I've increased from $56 an acre to $67 an acre. Let's flip to the other side. Maybe instead of cattle, I'm running goats, or maybe I'm running goats and I have a lower stocking rate, or maybe I just have a lower stocking rate. I'm running bigger cattle. Or I have my pastures aren't improved, or maybe actually a little poorer pastures. Maybe I only need to elect a 70% productivity factor, and so that'll lower my base value from $56 an acre to $39 an acre. So like I said, depending on your circumstances, there's a lot of different scenarios. Maybe you need to raise or lower that county base value, and this productivity factor is the tool to utilize to do whichever the case may be. All right, so when it comes to claim time, I have a trigger grid index. And so what is that trigger grid index? Well, the expected grid index, which is basically 100%, and I'm gonna multiply that by my coverage level. And so whenever the final grid index at the end of the interval, or so if I have February, March, at the end of March, a few days after, RMA will release whatever that final grid index is. If that is below my trigger grid index for that interval, an indemnity is typically due. So how do I calculate my indemnity? I'm going to take my trigger grid index. I'm going to subtract and take the difference between my trigger grid index and my final grid index. And then I'm going to divide it again by my trigger grid index. So what is this? This is basically, in summary, it's basically the difference, percentage difference of that year in comparison to what your trigger grid index was. And I'm going to multiply that by that policy protection per unit. And with that, that's in summary. We're going to go through some examples because it's a lot to digest and a lot to diagnose when we start talking about how these rainfall indexes work. And so we'll go through an apiculture example and a PRF example, but real quick, and we can also take a little time to answer some questions I want to release another poll question. So which of the following, this is kind of a pop quiz, which of the following allows producers to individualize their coverage based on the production of the insured acres or colonies? Is it your coverage level? Is it your county-based value? Is it your productivity factor? Or is it your percent of value allowed per interval? We'll give you a little time to answer that. Kim, Tom, Brandon, any questions that we need to highlight?
There's quite a few that we've got. I've just been kind of putting them off there till the end, but we'll take just a moment and talk about just a couple things to talk about. One of them was about NAP, and as far as the premium versus what it pays out, just kind of a reminder to everybody that's on the webinar, both NAP and federal crop insurance is insurance. So similar to your homeowner's insurance or your car insurance, the hope is that you never use it, that you pay a premium every year and you never have to use it because you never have a loss. So it's different than a lot of farm programs in that it doesn't always pay out. It only pays out if you have a loss. And so there will be years where you'll have premium. Now the question that we had, I don't know how big their loss was, and there may be other circumstances, but that is one thing that it brought to my mind, because a lot of people that are not familiar with it they think of it as a farm program, but it is actually insurance that's based on how often and how frequently do these events occur. And then unlike commercial insurance, unlike your homeowners or your car insurance, the federal crop insurance program doesn't have profit built into it. So they try to keep the loss ratio, how much premium they took in versus how many dollars they paid out, at a little under 1. So for every premium that they collect, the idea is to pay out $1.96 of premium back. So it is a little different in that way, but just a reminder that it is actually that. Also had one about a farm that was set up as an LLC. If all of the, what they call substantial beneficiary individuals, so beneficial holder interests. So basically anybody that has at least 10% in the entity, like that LLC, as long as all of them are veterans, then the entity would qualify as a veteran, but it has to be all of them. So even if it's an LLC or a corporation, as long as all the SBIs on there qualify, then it will qualify for that. Jane stumped me on this one. I've been looking for the question or the answer to this one, and I'm going to have to probably go a little bit further. It's talking about, do wildflower plantings used for grazing pastures for bees count under PRF? Have not found that one. It all comes down to whether bees qualify as livestock, because you have to kind of work through the definitions, and it all points back to livestock. And do bees count as livestock? So I'm going to have to go back, and unless in your studies, Ethan, you've come across this one, or Brandon or anybody. I have not ever seen that one.
I think you nailed that on the head, Kim, that the grazing side, it's got to be used for livestock. And so is the definition of a bee livestock?
An oyster is livestock. Well, I mean, no, wait, an oyster is actually a commodity. So that we'll have to get some definitions. And somebody just went that bees are eligible for ELAP, but ELAP is a different program than federal crop insurance. So the rules could be different. So I just need to check on that. I don't want to say yes and then find out they're not. So we'll check on that. Richard asked about the county rate, a standard rate you can see somewhere as an internal calculation. And Richard, I'm assuming you were talking about the premium rate. If so, it is actually on the RMA website under their in what they call their actuarial documents. There is a bit of a calculation to it, and the policy kind of shows how it's calculated. So, and then the last one, apiculture certification, owner statement or state inspector to certify. I'm going to have to check on that one a little bit further, because I don't have the answer on that one as far as the certification. So I hope I have that before the end of this webinar.
Yeah, it's outlined in the provisions. I'm trying to
apiculture.
I don't want to say what it exactly reads.
Yeah, I was trying to find, finally I found it. Oh, I couldn't find it because I had fat fingers and can't type certificate in correctly.
I know probably pretty much in summary, it's a little more than an owner statement, I believe,
Yeah.
but
It
I
says-
don't think you necessarily have to have the state. Kim, what is it?
Yeah. It
Policy
says a
behind it?
certification that the colonies qualify as apiculture and the selected index intervals support the vegetative. Yeah, so basically it looks to be self-certifying.
Okay, so it is
Doesn't
self-certified.
say, yeah.
Outstanding. Very good. Yes, keep the questions coming. Again, there's a lot, whenever we start talking about federal crop insurance, it always seems, Kim always says there's an exception to some different programs. And so trying to make sure we always want to make sure we revert back to the policy and make sure we say what's exactly right for apiculture or PRF, just to make sure that we're not thinking one direction on one program and get our programs and wires crossed. But it's always good, like I said, keep the questions coming, and we try to answer them as much as we can. So thank you again. We'll end the poll and share the results on our question. So we can tell 58% we got the correct on it is productivity factor allows you to individualize your coverage based on the production of the insured acres or colony. So that production was probably the key word there. It's definitely a hard question. Our percent of value allowed per interval, we see a quarter answered on that one. So that's a good second answer, I would say, almost, that qualifies as well, because basically, however your operation's set up, if you're primarily we go back to that grazing example, if March through June, that's your primary time, that's when those intervals need to be higher than if it's, I kind of do a little bit here. And so I elect that interval and maybe it's only 10-20% of my production. So like I said, that was a good second answer. Our county-based value is what is published by RMA that is looking at those averages that we talked about for the programs. And that's what that standard value is on a per acre or per colony basis. And then again, that coverage level, that's what you're electing. And I always say coverage level is how much risk are you willing to give up? So if I only elect 70%, maybe I don't, let me try to make sure the best way I say it. 90%, it's a lot more sensitive if I elect 90% coverage. The worst I can do is a 10% loss, versus if I elect 70%, the worst I can do is a 30% loss. And so that's really how much risk are you willing to take, or how much are you willing to transfer off to that insurance company, is the best way to summarize coverage level. So perfect, good job. Majority answered the correct question, or the correct answer. So that's always a good thing. We'll go through some examples. Like I said, I know there's a lot of vocabulary, I feel like, when we talk about these programs, and it's a lot to work through. And so I always feel like looking through an example is sometimes easier. So let's start with apiculture. We're in Brevard County, Florida. We elect apiculture with the following elections. We have 50 insured colonies. We have the 80%, we elect 80% coverage. We put a 70% productivity factor. Maybe our colonies are real young, or maybe the county-based value, what we're looking at, maybe we're like, well, that almost $102 per colony, that's pretty high for what I'm looking at on a revenue basis. And so maybe I need to cut that back just a little bit. So I'm going to elect 70% productivity factor. I have 100% share. And then we were talking about that certification. So February to May, I'm going out and I'm maybe my bees are going out and helping pollinate citrus or whatever the crop is out in Florida. And so I'm gonna elect 50% value allowed on February, March interval, and then April and May interval. So what's that?
Can I just, if you don't mind, I'm gonna interrupt here because I just found the answer on that question. As far as that statement, that certification, they have made it part of the acreage report. So it's automatically a part of the certification when you certify the number of colonies that you have.
Or
Yep.
number of colonies. Perfect.
So, yeah, it's not anything major that you do. They've made it part of the form.
Thank you, Kim. Perfect. That's always good to make sure, like I said, we want to make sure we got the right information. So back to our example, dollar amount of protection per colony. We're looking at taking your coverage level, multiplied by your productivity factor, and then by that county base value. So 100 or 80% coverage level multiplied by that 70% productivity factor, and then by our county base value. So 102, almost $102. We're looking at $57 per colony. So per unit or per interval, we take that value, that $57, we multiply it by the number of insured colonies. So that'd be 50 in this example. And then by that percent of value per interval, and then by our share. So for our February and March and our April and May interval, we're both looking at about $1,400 because we have that same 50-50 split percent of value allowed per interval. So we'll take that. I think looking at it from a table basis may be a little better. It helps me out whenever I'm looking at this. So we have that $1,400. That's basically our guarantee or our policy protection for each of those intervals. We're going to take that trigger grid index. So if we remember, we elected the 80% coverage level. So 80% times 100%, we're looking at 80% as our trigger grid index. And then our final grid index at the end of those two intervals comes out for our February and March. We're looking at a 65.4. And then for April and May, we're looking at an 88.3. So during both of those times, February, March, and then April and May, it rained actually. When you're looking at this, it rained less than expected. However, again, like I said, our final grid index is has to be below our trigger grid index. So I'll release the question, and I think I almost gave it away. So I'm expecting 100% on this one. So which interval will trigger an indemnity that we're looking at? And like I said, remember your final grid index is below our trigger grid index is what it has to be. So like I said, our expected is always 100%. But like I said, it looked like during both of these times, it actually rained less. However, and as we're going from there, that final grid index has to be below my trigger grid index in order for a loss to occur and an indemnity to trigger. We'll wrap this one up and share. And 70%, I think that's okay. 70%, yes. February, March is what we're looking at for indemnity to trigger. That April and May, since it's 88.3 and my trigger grid index is 80%, that still exceeds my trigger grid, and so an indemnity is not incurred. So how do I do the calculation for an indemnity for that February and March interval? I'll take the trigger, going back to that percentage difference. So my trigger index, which is 80 minus that 65.4 final grid index, and then you divide that by your trigger grid. So we're looking at 18.25%. We multiply that by that policy protection per unit, which, or like I said, if we're looking at it from a crop insurance perspective, that's kind of what your guarantee is. And so we take that 18.25 multiplied by $1,400, and we're looking at a $260 indemnity. Flip over to our PRF example. Same, like I said, the calculations are the exact same. We're just looking at different operations. We're moving from bees to, in this example, we're going to move to a hay operation. So I'm in Han County, South Dakota. I elect PRF for my hay operation. It's non-irrigated. And these are my elections. I have 200 acres that I'm going to insure. I elect the 90% coverage level. That equals to a county-based value, a little less than $300. And I pretty much am cutting hay from April to September. However, that August, September is my third cutting. I always try to get as much as I can out of that, but my primary times are April to July. So I'm looking at I'm going to break it out in 40% for both of those intervals. And then that last one, to wrap up that third cutting, I'm going to put 20%. Let's slide it back over to that 125% productivity factor. Maybe I put a lot of input cost. I work hard in keeping the weeds down, and I fertilize my hay, and it's improved land. And so maybe my quality of hay is a lot better. Maybe I'm a different type in kind. And so I'm going to increase that productivity factor by 125%. And then of course have a full share in that. So what's my dollar amount of protection per acre? I'm gonna take that 90% coverage level, multiplied by my 125% productivity factor, and then by that $300 county base value, and I'm looking at $335 an acre. When we take that for our 3 intervals, multiply it by our 200 acres, and then by that value allowed. So April and May interval, and then our June and July interval, we multiply it by 40%, and we get a little shy of $27,000 of our protection. And then that August-September interval, we're only multiply by 20%, and that's a little above $13,000. So we break that out in our 3 intervals. We take our trigger grid index, so 90% coverage level multiplied by that 100% typical expected grid index. And then at the end of the year, or at the end of each interval, we see these are our following grid indexes, indices, put it that way, and I'll launch. So this, make sure I want to highlight which interval will not trigger an indemnity. So the secret here is that 2 of these are going to trigger. So which one of these is not going to trigger an indemnity? And as we're looking at this, again, like I said, if you're thinking about this, I always got to look at it from a realistic perspective. In April and May, we see that final grid index of 129.7. So it was actually higher than the average for that year. That may be a good hint on what your answer might be. And then June, July, we see we were fell less, and we're looking at an 89.4. So if I have a coverage level of 90, that's going to trigger. And then we look at that in August, September, boy, it didn't rain at all hardly in Han County, South Dakota. And so it's only like a 22.1 index that we see there. And so
This was a trick question.
I know that knot I tried to highlight, and I wanted, if Diego could, put little stars and asterisks and all that to highlight the knot, trying to keep everybody on the same page here. But as we can look, and 73% of y'all got it correct. We're looking at April and May is when that indemnity would not trigger. However, my June and July interval and my August and September interval will trigger. Get my question off. So we'll go back to our presentation.
Those of us that are speed readers and have that problem of glancing through things would have missed that knot. I did. I was like, wait a minute, it's both.
So how am I going to calculate this indemnity? So I'm going to take both of those intervals that triggered. Again, I'm going to take the trigger grid index, subtract it, take that difference, take the difference between my trigger grid index and my final grid index, and then divide again by my trigger grid to get that percentage difference. And so for June and July, we're looking at about 2/3%, so just barely. And then August, September, we're looking at a 75% factor there. We take step 2, so we're going to multiply for each interval, we're going to take those step 1, those factors, multiply it by our protection per unit. And so in February and March, like I said, it just barely was under that 90% trigger index. So we're looking at $179 indemnity. However, in August and September, we're looking at about 10 grand there because it was such a drastic difference. When we summarize that, we're looking at a total indemnity for this producer of a little over $10,000. So that's a lot of information. You like I said, there's a lot of definitions to go through. It takes me a little bit of time to make sure I don't start saying the same thing over and over again, because it seems like it at times when we're talking about these rainfall indices. However, RMA has some great decision support tools out there. There's one for apiculture, and then I'll show you the one for PRF. I know you really probably can't see those numbers that well, but the cool thing that I think that's nice about these, and if you can see my laser here, this sample year. So basically they're taking what happened those previous years, and you get to put in your information, what coverage you want, your productivity factor, your interest, percent of value, et cetera, and so forth. And it's basically going to break it out and show, all right, if I had this policy in 2022 or 2021, I forgot how far back it goes, This is what it would look at. This is what my indemnities would look at. It even gives you a premium estimate on what my premium would be. And so I think that's a really cool opportunity and a good resource to use when we're looking at these rainfall rainfall programs. Again, I mentioned PRF has the same as well that you can utilize. And some other resources that I want to highlight, we'll go down to that bottom link here shortly, but there's some fact sheets out there that RMA produces that highlight some of the same things that we've talked about. Those are great to use. Again, we talked about our local crop insurance agent. Be sure to use the RMA locator that RMA has, or also talk to your local farmers and ranchers. Kim will reiterate on this, and she always highlights this, that you need to make sure you have a good crop insurance agent because it helps with this whole process. Crop insurance is one of those things that you always appreciate whenever you need it. But it's not always the greatest and brightest and biggest thing to talk about when we're talking about an agricultural industry, but we all need it. And we all see it, or we all possibly can need it. And like I said, there is incentives on managing that risk. And it's important to have a good crop insurance agent that has the heart of a teacher. That last link that popped up there at the bottom, kind of an animation technical difficulty there. But one thing I wanted to highlight as well, we're on Texas A&M University's campus, and they partner with Syracuse University as well on this. It's called Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans. And I know the A&M one, I believe, is coming soon, or their cohort's coming soon, but it's free of cost. Basically, it's a 30-day online course, and you get to spend 9 days at one of the 8 schools. Like I said, Texas A&M, Syracuse is the head university that leads this. I believe UCLA is one, LSU, Florida State, University of Missouri or Missouri. I'll help Kim out, University of Missouri there. And then there's trying to think of the other one, St. Joseph in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania has one. And like I said, I may be missing one. Maybe I think those are the main ones that have it. You can go to that link, and there's, like I said, it's for small business startups, entrepreneurial, and it's free of cost, and it's for veteran farmers and ranchers, or for veterans in general. So I wanted to share that as well. I think that's a great opportunity that's out there. Winning at Risk Management, of course, we have 2 webinars left of this series. We talked about our Crop Insurance 101 we had in the in-person sessions. We had part 1 talking about that whole farm revenue protection and micro farm. That was at the end of March. We're already at the end of April here with the Apiculture and Pasture, Rangeland, and Forage. Here in a couple of weeks, we'll talk about annual and perennial APH programs. And so we're looking at anything from peaches to triticale and highlight how those APH programs work. There's a lot of different, I think there's 75 commodities, I think is what I was looking at, that has APH programs available. So that'll be here in 2 weeks. And then we'll have our livestock programs. I know Diego was telling me that's going to be a big highlight. I think we have a lot of our livestock guys that are interested to see the programs available to them. And then hopefully this summer, we're planning to release basically a summary. It's going to be the Crop Insurance 101 and then this Winning at Risk Management series. We're going to combine those and break them out into more training modules. So if you're thinking about something you want to look at, we're hoping to have a landing page that you can go to and click on that and find that applicable information. And with that, that's all that I have today. Like I said, I know we probably hit right at an hour of this presentation, and I think Diego has a little bit to highlight on the Farmer Veteran Coalition. If you have any questions, there's our contact info there below. Again, I want to thank you. I don't think I started it. I usually do, but thank you for your service. I always like to say that to the men and women who fight on the front lines for us and for our freedoms that we have in this country. And thank you again for your service and for being a part of this great agricultural sector that produces the food, fuel, and fiber for the world. And so thank you again for attending. Thank you for your time. Diego, I'll turn it back over to you and we'll open it up for any questions.
Yeah, so again, feel free to ask some more questions. We still got time for Q&A. I'll just do a quick overview of Farmer Veteran Coalition. If you guys are not a member, please become a member. It's free to become a member. I'm putting my email in the chat, if you would like a copy of a PDF form of this presentation, as well as the link to the recording for our YouTube channel, send me an email. I'll send it to you. You should get a post assessment at the end of this webinar, as well as you should get one tomorrow as well. Just it's a few questions. Just answer it. We really appreciate it. Helps us improve these webinars and know what we need to work on and stuff like that. As regarding Farmer Veteran Coalition, if you have kept up with the fellowship fund, we will be making announcements by the end of the first week of May. So that's coming up real soon. Keep an eye out for that. Again, we got part 3 and part 4 coming up for the webinar. So keep an eye on that. I will do an email blast and social media blast for those. If you know anyone that would be interested in this, please let them know. That's all I got for Farm Veteran Coalition. Ethan, if you got anything else to say, go ahead.
I think I'm golden. Thank you again. Like I said, we can open it up if there's any outstanding questions. We'll be on here next few minutes, and please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, and we look forward to seeing you at upcoming webinars.
All right. And then again, if you got any questions, send me an email. I can forward it to them as well. So thank you again for joining us.